Under the sun, human labor often looks like a crowded machine. People work in close physical proximity, grinding through endless cycles of daily tasks, yet they remain isolated from the people right next to them. If you look closely at why people work so relentlessly, the engine driving them isn't usually strict survival. The author observes that all this toil and achievement springs from a single, exhausting source: one person's envy of another. This spectrum graph maps out the philosophical paradox at play here. On the far left, we have the extreme of total apathy. This is the fool who folds their hands and chooses complete inaction, ultimately accelerating their own ruin. On the far right is relentless ambition driven by envy. Notice the massive conceptual void right in the center. When we isolate that relentless ambition node, you can see how it outputs into an infinite, non-resolving cycle. Grasping 2 handfuls of toil just to outpace your peers is like trying to chase the wind. It's a metric that can never actually be caught. Measuring your life by how far ahead of your neighbor you are guarantees exhaustion. It is an inherently futile way to measure human meaning. Zooming out from middle-tier rivalry, the text turns its attention to the very bottom of the social hierarchy, examining the reality of systemic oppression. Here, a harsh power dynamic is laid bare. All leverage and absolute force reside strictly on the side of the oppressors. The text repeats a specific, critical observation about this suffering. The tears of the oppressed are devastating, but the compounding tragedy is that they have no comforter to share the burden. Looking at this stark imbalance forces a grim calculation. The author states that the dead, or those who have never been born at all, are better off than those forced to endure this kind of isolated suffering. Cruelty creates the initial pain, but the structural weight is finalized when the victim is left to face that power entirely alone. A logical question arises. If poverty and rivalry are so brutal, does climbing to the absolute top of the economic ladder cure the suffering? To answer this, we look at the archetype of the solitary hoarder. This is a person who has successfully amassed immense wealth, yet lives entirely alone, without family, heirs, or companions. Eventually, the hoarder faces an internal crisis. They look at the endless self-deprivation required to build their fortune and ask, "For whom am I toiling?" There is no one with whom to share the resulting enjoyment. Wealth stripped of human connection provides no escape. It is a continuation of the exact same meaningless grind, locking the earner inside a very expensive cage. We can escalate this test from individual wealth to the highest possible human pursuit: absolute political power and historical legacy. Consider an incumbent king. He has reigned for years, but he has grown old, foolish, and completely isolated by his refusal to heed the warnings of those around him. Then a disruptor enters the picture. A poor but wise youth rises from the absolute bottom of society, perhaps even from a prison cell, to challenge the establishment. This succession cycle curve shows the youth's approval index experiencing a sharp geometric surge. But watch the betrayal of time. Reaching its apex, the curve immediately charts a vertical crash, a 100% decay rate. The next generation abandons the once celebrated youth. The cycle reveals a harsh truth about human nature. The crowd is loyal to the idea of succession, never to the individual. Even the highest peak of human achievement, absolute rule over a nation, will expire. Relying on an individual legacy to provide lasting existential meaning is a mathematical dead end. There is a philosophical alternative to the extremes we mapped out earlier. It proposes carrying one handful with tranquility instead of desperately grasping for 2. This is based on straightforward economic logic. 2 are better than 1 because shared labor inherently produces a superior, stable return on investment. In a hostile environment, companionship provides critical survival benefits. If one person falls, the other can provide physical support to lift them up. If the environment turns freezing, 2 lying down together can pool their resources to keep warm. A pair also gains a defensive advantage. A solitary individual is highly vulnerable to the systemic oppression we saw earlier, but 2 individuals can mount a functional, coordinated defense. Abandoning the pursuit of total dominance in favor of mutual reliance is the only logical survival strategy in a harsh world. The text takes this survival logic and escalates it one final time, expanding from a pair of partners to a unified collective. This vector diagram illustrates the central structural metaphor, the cord of 3 strands. We can see the tensile strength of a single strand, then a double. But braiding a 3rd strand introduces an exponential jump in load-bearing capability. Applying this engineering principle to the human condition shows us why a community is resilient. A single individual snaps under pressure, but an interwoven group distributes the load. Individual ambition leaves people grasping at vapor, chasing the wind. Human connection acts as a tangible, physical anchor. Against the vapor of individual ambition, the shared strength of a community provides a durability that isolation cannot match.